I can't tell you how enthusiastic I am here to be with people in federal prison all across the nation. My name is Michael Santos. I'm the founder of Prison Professors, and it's really important for me that I get to communicate with as many people in prison as possible. And the reason for that is because I really need your help. I need you to know the kind of work that we are doing to try and improve outcomes of the criminal justice system. This isn't something I just started today. It's something that I've been working on for many, many years. And as we spend this time together, you're going to learn the backstory. But one thing I want you to remember is none of this is about me. I'm an ambassador of the message and I will share it with you, but I'm sharing it with you from the perspective of helping you understand what can you do to position yourself for the best possible outcome. And in order to do that, I've got to earn your trust. Right? I know that you've been in prison for a long time and you've participated in a lot of programs, and a lot of them might seem a little bit cynical, where you just sign a form to be in the program, and at the end of the program you get a certificate, but at the end of the day you really don't have any skill set that's going to fundamentally change your life. Well, the work that we do is about changing the law, but also changing your life. We want you to recognize what steps can you take today to become the CEO of your life. And to be the CEO of your life, you got to be thinking about best possible outcomes. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But because my journey through prison is so long, I want to break it down by, first of all, asking all of you, how many of you think that the First Step Act does not apply to you? So every time I ask that question in a prison, a lot of hands go up, and their hands go up because they think it doesn't apply to them because they're only thinking about the time credits. And they're thinking about the First Step Act's provision that if you've got a crime of violence or if you've got a high recidivism score, you're not going to get those time credits. But I'm going to ask those of you who believe that the First Step Act doesn't apply to you to engage with me in this exercise. And I'm going to paint a scenario. The first thing I always ask is, how many of you know Haleem Flowers? When I ask that question, there's typically some people who know Haleem Flowers, but there's many more who do not. And in my view, everybody in prison should know Haleem Flowers. And the reason that I bring this story up is because he's one of the reasons that I get to communicate with more than 1 million people in jails and prisons across the country. And I want to give you that backstory. So to understand about Haleem, what you need to know is he grew up without a lot of options. He grew up in the inner city, family justice impacted, not having a lot of good role models in his life. By the time he was 16, he was engaged in a crime that resulted in a double homicide with a weapon. Now, I always would ask the people in prison, I said, so that crime, double homicide with a weapon, would that crime result in being eligible for the First Step Act? And people inevitably would say no, because that's what the disqualifying factors consider in the actual law. It's not up to the Bureau of Prisons, it's the law. Congress passed the law, the president signed it, and when he did that, he made certain crimes ineligible, including crimes of violence. They also put some parameters on there with regard to scoring somebody for their eligibility for lower recidivism or minimum recidivism rates. So everybody would recognize, Haleem would not qualify. What people need to recognize is that Haleem went into this system at 16. And with that crime, a judge sentenced him to a double life sentence. And he started that term inside of a juvenile facility until he turned 18. And then at 18, they sent him to USP Lewisburg, which is a real prison. At least it was a real prison when I was serving my sentence. And I'll get to my sentence a little bit later. Let's try to stay focused on Haleem. Because Haleem gets to Lewisburg, and when he gets there, initially, he starts to adjust to the penitentiary in the ways of the penitentiary. And he gets into some challenges, but eventually, he kind of finds his way and recognizes that if he ever wants to get out of there, he's got to focus on what he can do rather than what the system does. And so he focused on getting an education, a GED, learning to develop skills in writing, in reading, develop skills as a painter. And eventually, after about 15 years, he got transferred to the United States Penitentiary in Atwater, California. That was around 2016. And in 2016, when he walked into USP Atwater, the warden, Andy Matavusian, recommended to him that he work through our program, which is called Preparing for Success After Prison. And I will get to the details of that program much later into the presentation, but it was really that start at USP Atwater where this all really began. And you'll remember that name because it was Warden Andy Matavusian who urged Haleem to get into the program. And I have a long history with Andy Matavusian, as you'll learn about as we get into this story. But Haleem starts writing me from prison, telling me he was going to do everything that I did while I was in prison. He got so inspired from reading the book, Earning Freedom, Conquering a 45-Year Sentence, that he started to write me from prison. The challenge was, at that time, the First Step Act didn't exist. In fact, there wasn't even a provision for a federal judge to release a person from prison, even if he wanted to. The only way that a judge could do that would be either if the person won on appeal, if a person filed a motion that reintroduced jurisdiction to the judge, or if the Bureau of Prisons filed a motion for compassionate release. And the Bureau of Prisons, frankly, just isn't in the business of letting people out. So when Haleem wrote me, we were still working on developing this whole concept of earning freedom through merit, but it didn't exist yet. And so I continued doing my advocacy work for many years, but didn't hear back from Haleem until around 2022, when another advocacy group reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you know Haleem Flowers?" And my response was, "Yeah, I kind of remember him from several years ago because he was going through our program at Atwater." And they said, "Well, he got out and he wants to talk to you." So I reached out to Haleem and we had a nice phone conversation, and I asked him how he got out. And here's the magic. Haleem said, before there was a law, I invested in myself. And because I invested in myself, when the law came and the judge all of a sudden had jurisdiction, I had people who believed in me, lawyers and other advocacy groups, and they filed the papers. A judge agreed that incarceration no longer made sense, and he authorized me to go back home. So a guy with a double homicide went into prison when he was 16, having a double life sentence, reaches out to me in 2022, 2021, and says he got out. But then I asked Haleem, and it's kind of interesting to tell this story, well, what have you been doing since you got out? And he said, I did do all of the things that you did while I was in prison. And I wrote a lot of books, and I was trying to build my career selling the books that I wrote. And as an author, I will tell you, that's not an easy way to make a living. Printing books that cost maybe $7 or $8, $9 to manufacture, and then selling them for $20. Just by the time you figure all costs so that it's associated with that, it's a very tough way to make a living. But Haleem was doing it, and he got his big break very early when the Apple Store in San Francisco invited Haleem to fly out from DC and tell his story at the Apple Store in Union Square. And after he's telling a story about his journey of going through 22 years in high security penitentiaries, a guy in the audience listened and he said, I really like what you're doing, Haleem. He said, are you doing anything else? And Haleem said, yeah, I am. He said, I learned how to paint while I was in prison. And I took the skills that I learned of painting. I've been painting these murals that show the pathway from the projects to the penitentiary. And that pathway is what I really want to use as my own advocacy to try and get the laws to change. And the guy says, that sounds really cool. He says, how many paintings do you have? And Haleem says, I have 12. And the guy says, well, do you intend to sell any of them? And Haleem said, yeah, I intend to sell them, and I'm going to use those resources to kind of build this project. And the guy said, well, if they're for sale, I'll take all 12. And Haleem says, but I didn't tell you how much I want for them, what they're going to cost. And the guy said, oh, well, what do they cost? And Haleem said, I'd like to get $2,500 a piece. The guy does quick math in his head. He says, well, that's $30,000. He said, let me write you a check right now. Haleem says, you haven't even seen them yet. He said, that's okay. I believe in you. The guy writes a check. Pretty good outcome for a guy who just got out of prison. And the guy's writing the check, and he says, well, you're in San Francisco. He says, tell me, Haleem, do you like basketball? And Haleem says, yeah, I like basketball. He says, great. He said, how'd you like to go to the Golden State Warriors game with me tonight? Haleem said, no, I don't want to go. The guy says, why not? Haleem says, I don't like the Golden State Warriors. he says, well, tell me, who do you like? Haleem says, I like the Lakers. I said, okay. He looks at his phone. He said, well, Lakers are coming to town in about 2 weeks. How about I fly you out, stay at my house, we'll go to Lakers game together. Haleem says, yeah, sure, I think I could do that. Guy says, great. He said, by the way, I own the Golden State Warriors. So I like to tell you that story because you never know who you're going to meet in society. You never know what impact those people are going to have on your future and on your life. But if you start sowing seeds today, you are going to learn that you could become successful, that you could become something more than an individual who's wearing prison garb and standing up for count. So you got to be thinking about this today, and don't start preparing for the best outcome at the end of the journey. Start right now. Even if a law doesn't apply to you, think about what you can do to put yourself in a position so when things do change, you are in a position to seize opportunities and get the results that you want. And that's what you're going to learn through this program. But Haleem's story is so fascinating that I want to continue telling you the rest of what he told me. So he said he flies out to the guy's house, and the guy lives in Marin, just across the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco area, and has a house right on the San Francisco Bay. And when you're in prison for many years, you never see water. So Haleem had been in prison for 22 years, and he's a Muslim, so he's doing his morning prayers. And he told me, I couldn't even get through my morning prayers because right outside my window, I saw the beautiful San Francisco Bay. And I couldn't believe how far I had come from being inside high security prisons to being here. And then he goes to the game, and the guy tells him, now I want you to know where you're sitting right here, this is Billionaires Row. Everybody here, they're at the top of their game. They're the best in the world at what they do. Just like those athletes out there. They are skilled, they've trained, they're the best in the world at what they do. And I want you to know, I didn't buy those paintings from you out of charity. I'm not a philanthropist, I'm a businessman. And some would say I'm a hard businessman. But when I listened to your story, I saw the potential in you. And I brought you here because I don't ever want you to be intimidated around any of these people. You had a double life sentence, but instead of giving up hope, you invested in yourself, you found a pathway to contribute to society, and you've done an amazing thing. And all I want for you is to go out there and be successful. And in his first year, Haleem sold $1 million worth of paintings, a skill he developed in prison. And then he continued to practice his craft, and even the Queen of England bought one of his paintings. In fact, many of you in prison are familiar with the famous movie Shawshank Redemption. Well, when Warner Brothers did its 25-year reunion or history or celebration of Shawshank Redemption, they hired Haleem Flowers to do all of the artwork. And this is such an amazing story of somebody who people would think would not ever get out of prison. But because he invested in himself first, he's now home. And if ever you have your family have an opportunity to look on the internet, make sure that you visit Haleem Flowers on the web, and you will see what a global sensation he is all over the world. And if it was just Haleem, if I was just giving you the story about Haleem, maybe you'd say, well, he was lucky. But what about Adam Clausen, a guy who was serving 213 years at USP Allenwood? Also wouldn't have qualified for the First Step Act, but he's home today. What about Tommy Walker, a guy who was serving triple life in high security penitentiaries, but because he invested in himself, when the law changed, he was ready. The question is, are you going to be ready? I didn't know any of this when I started my sentence, but one thing I do know is that Adam Clausen, Tommy Walker, and Haleem Flowers would be giving the same message that I am. If you want to get a result, if you want to change things, you've got to think about what can I do to be extraordinary and compelling. And this is a message that I highly recommend you think about. And it's something I'm really vested in. In fact, some of you may know that the current deputy director of the Bureau of Prisons, Josh Smith, was formerly incarcerated. And now he sits at the very highest level of the agency, working to shape policies and programs that will help more people emerge with their dignity intact and opportunities to prosper. And I've had the opportunity to work with Josh and his team in DC. And the first time I went there and spoke to him, he asked me a question. What would you do if you were in my seat? And I think that's a good question for anybody who's watching this video. If you had the opportunity to influence the Bureau of Prisons, an agency that influences the lives of millions of people, what would you do if you were in that seat? And before I'll get into that question and tell you what I said, I'm going to ask people in the audience, okay, how many of you have heard this message at any stage in your journey? Here's the message. The best way to serve time is to forget about the world outside and focus on your time in prison. And anytime I ask that question, whether it's in a high security United States penitentiary, a medium security federal prison, a low security prison, or even a camp, all the hands go up. And I'll tell you something, anybody who gives you that message is not your friend. But it's a message that is prevalent in every prison across America. And so when Josh asked me what I would do, I told him that story. And I said, one thing I would do is I would change that messaging. And I would make sure that every person who's going into the prison system at A&O and at every team meeting really understands, what does excellence look like? What does it mean to be the best in the world at something? What does it mean to be extraordinary and compelling, like Adam Clausen, like Tommy Walker, like Haleem Flowers? What about you? What makes you extraordinary and compelling? And I said, and if we did that in the Bureau of Prisons, you would have more people on a very deliberate, intentional path preparing for success. And that's really what I want to be talking with you about today. But first, I've got to earn your trust. I've got to let you know who I am, how I got here, what was the pathway to the journey. Because I am you. I am not special. And you're going to hear that as I tell the story. I am you. So that it started for me on the day of my arrest, on August the 11th, 1987. I was very young. Ronald Reagan was in the White House. There was a movement to start this war on drugs.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions.
But I didn't understand what that meant because I saw the movie Scarface when I was 20, started trafficking in cocaine, and with the wisdom of a 20-year-old, believed that if I didn't touch the cocaine, I wasn't really breaking the law. Not knowing that by putting other people in the seat of transporting and storing it, I was actually making myself really more of a threat to the society and to the law, and expose myself to a longer sentence. So when I got arrested, I was not put in general population. I was put in solitary confinement. So because I was in solitary confinement for a year, I didn't get the message that the best way to serve time is to forget about the world outside. I was by myself. I could stretch my arms out and touch the walls on both sides. I was locked in a cell with a concrete slab and a toilet. And in that environment, I had to find my way. And the only resource we had, because at that time, we weren't allowed to have books in the cell. So the only book I could have was the Bible. And I had never been too spiritual growing up. I was Catholic. I went to Catholic school, but I was a kind of a wild kid when I was young. But I'd read the Bible. And I'd start reading at the book of Genesis and go all the way to the end, the book of Revelation, and then I just start from the beginning. And there were some inspiring stories in there that kind of gave me hope. One of them was the book of Joseph, a guy who began in prison in the Old Testament. One of them was the prodigal son. And a very powerful message for me was always the parable of the talents. And as I interpreted it, it meant if God blesses all of us with certain talents or certain powers, and it's our job to use them. If we don't use them, God's going to not only take away the blessings that we have, but he's going to make things more difficult for us. But if we use those talents to the benefit of society and others, more blessings will come our way. but I still wasn't ready because I wanted to believe what my attorney was telling me. And he was giving me bad information. He would tell me there's a big difference between an indictment and a conviction. But anybody that comes into the system should know there's not a big difference. If there's a federal indictment, it's very likely that a conviction is going to follow. And it's your job to always be thinking about what steps can I take to put myself on a pathway for a better outcome. I didn't really know how to do that yet because I wasn't ready to accept responsibility. I was still living in denial, still trying to believe that my attorney could solve my problems. And I knew I was guilty, but I continued to compound my problems because instead of accepting responsibility, identifying with victims, expressing remorse, I went to trial. I put my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, so help me God. And then I proceeded to lie and say I didn't do it. But after several weeks, the jury returned its verdict and they convicted me of every count. And that was the moment that really started to change for me. Not only because I was convicted, but because of the loss that was falling all around me. I'd realized then that I'd made a series of really catastrophic decisions that exacerbated my problems. And not only that, I really humiliated my family. My grandparents would not speak to me. My parents were ashamed of me. My sisters were, they were all supportive, but I could see the pain that I'd caused to them. And then I also had to kind of deal with the complexity of realizing I'm going to be in prison for the rest of, I could potentially be in prison for the rest of my life because I was facing a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. And I didn't even know what that meant because I was in solitary. So I didn't get this concept of what is statutory good time or a possibility of changing a sentence. All I knew was that a jury convicted me of operating what's called a continuing criminal enterprise, and that meant I faced a possible sentence of life in prison. But fortunately, there was an officer there. And that officer, I wish I could go back and thank. I just would never know how to find him. His name is Officer Wilson. And good luck trying to find an Officer Wilson from a detention center back in 1987. So I can't really go back and thank him other than try to live his message. And you get to know the officers when you're living in solitary confinement for a year. You get to know who the officers are that are friendly. And this guy was the guy that would, you live in solitary, your food comes through a door. So it's kind of like living like an animal, where the officer unlocks a door, a trap door within a steel door. He passes your little cold food tray through the steel door, and that's what you eat. So in the first year, I was kind of defiant, saying that I didn't do anything wrong. It's just the government coming after me. It's not fair. But it was after I was convicted, I realized I'd really made things bad. And when Officer Wilson came to see me after the verdict, he said, "How did it go?" And I said, "It didn't go so well." He said, "What happened?" I said, "I was guilty of every count." So I was waiting for sentencing, and I remember him telling me, "I'm going to help you." And I thought, what are you going to do? You're going to bring me an extra food tray tomorrow? You bring me an apple? And his response was, "No, I'm going to bring you a different kind of food." And he brought me a book. And at that time, I hadn't been such a great reader. I didn't know so much, but I don't even know which book I would have chosen. But he passed me this book, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And I don't know who Frederick Douglass was. I didn't know who he was at that time in my life. And I had no idea why he would be passing me this book. But as I start reading through it, I kind of got the message relatively quickly, because Frederick Douglass, as it turned out, he was born during the era of slavery. And for his first 20 years of his life, that was all that he knew, was being enslaved. And if you're living in the hole for a year, you kind of feel like you don't have your own life. You don't have your own liberty. You kind of feel like you're enslaved and you're never going to be free. But what Frederick Douglass, a story that was so moving, is that when he was 20, he escaped. And when he escaped, he didn't go on to live his own life and think about himself. Instead, he figured out, how could I work to help the people I left behind? What could I do to try and liberate more people? And he was never a politician or a man of power, but that doesn't mean he didn't become a man of influence. In fact, he became one of the world's most influential abolitionists that worked to free the slaves and or abolish slavery. And while I'm in the hole and I'm reading the book, I'm also simultaneously getting the mentoring from Officer Wilson. I'm standing there in the door and he's talking to me through a locked door, and I'm kind of listening through a metal frame as he's asking me questions about, well, how do you think Frederick Douglass did it? And through those conversations, it became quite clear how he did it. First, he had to learn how to read because he was illiterate. Then he had to learn how to write. Then he had to learn how to communicate well. And by developing and using those skills, he succeeded in influencing and persuading other people. And through that effort, he became one of the most influential people in abolishing slavery. And the irony is that at that time, Frederick Douglass used to get criticized by the people he was trying to help. And they would say to him, why are you spending so much time with people who support slavery or people who are opposed to abolishing those laws? And Frederick Douglass had a very simple answer. He would say, look, I don't need to change your mind that these laws are unjust. That's the people I need to change. And so I definitely need to spend my time with them. And when I go into prisons, that's why it's important for me to share that story. You see, I'm your friend. I am investing time, energy, resources to try and expand pathways for people to earn freedom. But I cannot succeed without your help. And sometimes going into prisons, people are cynical or they're resistant and they don't want to get involved. But I'm asking you, get involved. Help our organization and team work to lower disciplinary infractions and increase pathways to self-directed release plans and goals of living as a law-abiding, contributing citizen. And if we work together, that's part of the collaboration, as I'll continue to speak about through this presentation. And so the Officer Wilson continues to bring me books, and he brings me a book about Socrates called Plato's Republic. Now, at that time, I don't know who Socrates is. I don't know what philosophy is. I probably didn't know how to spell philosophy. But when he gives me this book, I'm reading about Socrates, and I can immediately identify with him because Socrates is inside, locked in a solitary cell, just like I was. Now, Socrates was in jail because at that time, it was against the law for people from one class to teach people from a lower class. And Socrates believed that every human being had power, and he wanted to teach everybody. And because of that, he executed his plan, but it was against the law. And the authorities charged him with a crime, judges convicted him, and they sentenced him to death. Well, I was facing life in prison. So if you get life in prison, you're going to die in prison. And I could identify with that message. And it's just as I'm hoping that you will identify with this message that I'm telling you. So by learning about Socrates, I learned how to think differently. Because Socrates didn't only think about himself. He always thought about making things better for everybody in society. And when he had an opportunity to leave his jail cell, he chose to stay even though he knew he was going to die. Many people associate this concept of Socratic thinking with Socrates. It's this concept of developing knowledge and a pathway by asking better questions. And I remember, after reading Plato's Republic, lying in my cell, putting my hands behind my back, staring up at this concrete ceiling and feeling the walls and the ceiling closing in on me, and thinking to myself, is there anything that I could do? Is there anything that I could do that would influence the way that law-abiding, tax-paying citizens view me? And that's a yes or a no question. And if you have hope, you believe that there's always something you can do. And I believe there's something I can do. I just didn't know what it was. Because when you're living in solitary for a year, it is exquisitely designed to obliterate hope. And you got to find a way to build your own hope. And I found hope by thinking about law-abiding citizens who would have influence over my life in the future, starting with a judge, then maybe a warden in a prison, then maybe case managers and unit managers in prison, then maybe probation officers, then maybe employers. So many people. And I would ask, is there anything that I could do right now that might prove worthy of support from those people? And the answer is yes. I didn't know what it was. So I just started to use that Socratic questioning concept, just like I would encourage you to do. What can you do today to influence people that you're going to meet in the future? And I'm not going to say that I have all the answers, but I am going to share the strategies that worked for me. It was no big deal. 3 parts, a 3-part plan that started when I was in solitary confinement. If I want to influence people to see me as something other than a coke dealer, I got to think about what would they expect of me. And I came up with this 3-part plan. Number 1, they would want me to get an education. Because if I work on getting an education, that would demonstrate I don't want to be a criminal anymore. Number 2, they would want me to contribute to society in some kind of meaningful, measurable way. And then 3, they would want me to build a support network. Find people that I don't know and people that don't know me and persuade those people to come into my life, to build a coalition of support. And I believed if I could do that, more opportunities would open in the future. But that's my plan. What's your plan? I need all of you to be thinking about your plan. Because if you don't have a plan, I can assure you that the system has a plan for you, and you're not going to like the result. Right now, there are people all over the country that feed this $100 billion industry. And they're looking at prison numbers, and they're right now figuring out how many prison cells do we need to build in the future. Not only to incarcerate you when you come back, but to incarcerate your children. And typically, it's people of low influence, people of color, people that don't have powerful ideas or friends that are populating prisons. But even highly successful, wealthy people are coming in, and sometimes they get hit pretty hard because the system itself will say, you should have known better. And so it's important to think about all these concepts and figure out what can you do about it. And I was so grateful to Officer Wilson for giving me these books and continuing to bring me books about Viktor Frankl or Nelson Mandela or so many others that I got inspired. And I still remember sitting on my concrete slab and writing a letter to the journalist who had been covering my trial and saying, you've been covering my trial, maybe you want to know a little something about what I've learned from Officer Wilson. And if you want to learn that, come see me. And that led a journalist, his name was Stuart Eskenazi, to come visit me in the jail cell. And when he came to visit me, I told him that this officer had brought me these books, and these books had inspired me, and I was going to change my life while I was in prison. I didn't know what I was going to get because I hadn't been sentenced yet. But I knew I had a plan. And that's what I want for every one of you. Have a plan. And as a result, Stuart Eskenazi published a newspaper article, big headline, drug kingpin says he's going to change his life. Of course, nobody believes that when it comes out in the newspaper. And I remember going to sentencing, and my judge read the entire article before he imposed sentence. And I'll always remember what the prosecutor said. He said, Michael Santos said he read some books while he was in the hole, and good for an officer for bringing him those books. But we believe that if he spends every day of his life in an all-consuming effort to repay society, and if he lives to be 300 years old, our society will still be at a significant net loss. I'm not special. I'm sure many of you who are reading this or watching this video are going through those same types of experiences. You've had your hope obliterated. Your life has been smashed. And it's your job to figure out, what are you going to do? I remember after the prosecutor made his statement, the judge sentenced me to 45 years in federal prison. I didn't even know what that meant because I'd been in the hole for a year. So I would learn everything as I moved further into the journey when marshals locked me in chains and transported me across country to United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. It's the most violent federal prison in the nation. And there's a lot of people who are complaining about what it's like in there. But for me, it was a treat because I'd been incarcerated in the hole for a year. So being able to smell, or just breathe fresh air was just a little something I could feel gratitude for. Being able to see the blue sky, I could feel grateful. Now, all the way around the penitentiary, there's a 40-foot concrete wall. So I could see up to the wall, but I could not see on the other side of the wall. And so, I know I'm incarcerated, but I'm walking around at least a big prison yard. And now, for the first time, I'm starting to hear these messages about what does it take to live in prison, how you should live with a ball of hate in your stomach and anger, and it's everybody else's fault. And for me, though, I was so fortunate because Officer Wilson had given me a different path by introducing me to people with whom I could identify. And I hope that some of you could identify with me. Hope that some of you can identify, if you're going through this system, what is the best possible outcome in your life. Nobody can change the past, but all of us can sow seeds for something better. And that's what I was determined to do. But once I got into the prison, I started to hear all the negativity. And after a month, I'd learned a little bit more about the federal system, and I'd learned that on a 45-year sentence under the law that existed at the time of my conviction, I could finish that sentence in 26 years. But it's kind of hard to process, what does 26 years in prison mean? Because I hadn't been alive that long yet. I got arrested when I was 23. So we're recording this at the end of 2025. Just to put it into perspective, 26 years into the future is 2051. So you're in prison now. You don't get out until 2051. It's hard to process that. But fortunately, I had my plan. And I'm going to ask you to remember that plan. Get an education, contribute to society, and build a support network. 3 prongs, no big deal. The more important takeaway is, what's your plan? I remember after 30 days, I went to my first team meeting. And when I'm in the team meeting, by then I'd heard about these things called federal correctional institutions. And I asked, after they asked me if I had any questions, I said, well, I've heard about these things called federal correctional institutions. Is there any way I could transfer to one of those FCIs? And I'll always remember the unit manager telling me, a federal judge sentenced you to a 45-year sentence. You have public safety factors for greatest severity, sophisticated criminal activity, and sentence length. With 3 PSFs, you should expect to serve all of your time in a high-security penitentiary. So again, you're feeling that you're walking into, this scenario where abandon all hope, anybody who enters here, right? But I didn't need the system to give me hope because I found that hope in the lessons I learned from the books that I read. So I started by reaching out and executing that 3-part plan. Number 1 was to get an education. So, very easy. I didn't have access to the technology that exists in prisons today, but I did have a different technology. I had a ballpoint pen and a piece of paper. And some of you may have heard this story that the pen is mightier than the sword. If you could learn how to use words, turn them into sentences, turn sentences into paragraphs, you can empower yourself. You could change the way you think. And if you change the way you think, you could change the way other people see you. And if you could change the way other people see you, maybe you could change the world. I got inspired by that because that's what Frederick Douglass did. That's what Socrates did. If they could do it, why couldn't I do it? They didn't have technology, but they invested in themselves. So I started very easily with a very simple concept that I will encourage you to do. Write a letter. I found the address for universities across the country, and I wrote a very simple letter. My name is Michael Santos. I've been in prison since 1987. I made a lot of really bad decisions, but I want to get an education so that when I get out, I could live as a good citizen. And, if you send 1 letter out, you shouldn't expect to get a letter back. But if you send 10 letters out, what will happen? Really? I found that if you send 10 letters out, you've got a 10 times better chance of nobody writing you back. You see, the reality is when you're living in prison, you've got to become persistent. You've got to believe that no matter how many obstacles come your way, it's your job to overcome them. It's nobody else's job. It's your job. And so I kept writing letters. And by writing letters, eventually I got into school. And when Ohio University sent me my first package of books, all of a sudden I felt as if I was a student and not just federal prisoner number 16377-004. And I kept pushing myself to work toward getting that first university degree. And with the collective wisdom of the penitentiary, people were telling me, why are you pushing so hard to get your bachelor's degree when you got a 45-year sentence? Stretch it out. But I always felt this real sense of urgency to get it done. And I hope you feel a sense of urgency to start changing your life, to start rebuilding, recalibrating, getting ready for the next chapter. I always believe that if I got one goal, if I reached one goal, more opportunities would open that would have not been available to me without the goal. And by 1992, I got my first university degree. And I wanted to continue going to, I initially wanted to go to law school. You keep writing letters. I found a university that couldn't let me into law school. It was Hofstra University, but they said, we have more flexibility with a master's program. Would you want to get a master's degree? And I said, I would. And they said, well, what would you want to study? And I said, by then I'd said that I believed that mass incarceration was one of the great social injustices of our time. And I wanted to work to change that. Because I was in prison with people that was a grandparent, the father, and the grandson, all in the same housing unit. And people were coming in and getting out, and they'd fail outside, and they'd come back in. And I wanted to have a role in trying to change that, so I wanted to learn about it. Well, Hofstra did not have a criminal justice program, but they said we could structure a degree for you under sociology and political science, and that pushed me to continue my work. So what am I doing? I'm executing my plan. I'm getting an education, as is evidenced by university degrees. I'm finding mentors to come into my life because many of these university professors would come and visit me in federal prison. And then they would invite me to contribute chapters to their books. Getting an education, contributing to society by publishing, and building a support network. That's the power of having a plan. And when you've got a plan, all of a sudden you're no longer a puppet with everybody pulling strings in your life. You're actually building. You're building something that can influence what you become. And when you're doing that, you're restoring confidence. And that is an essential component of being free. So I get through this project, and eventually I get into a PhD program at the University of Connecticut. But a warden blocked me. He said, it says United States Penitentiary out there. It doesn't say United States University. It was a very different era in the mid-1990s. That was the dawn of the war on drugs. And so I had to find a new way. And one of my mentors, who was one of the leading textbook authors in the United States, said, why don't you write your own book? You've been publishing in our books for several years, and our publisher would really like to see a book that you write on your own. And this was really an amazing opportunity for me, because very early, this is probably in my 7th or 8th year, when I'm in this pathway, I had set a goal, because by working so hard through prison, I'd learned how easily people fail and struggle when they get out of prison. And one of the reasons that people fail is because they don't have a good path on the other side of the journey. So I'd set this goal that said, I want to make sure that when I get out, I have enough money in the bank to last me an entire year. So I could purchase all of the things that I would need, but I would still have enough money to go a whole year, even if I don't get a paycheck. Again, it's the importance of a plan. If you set a goal like that at the end of your journey, it's unlikely you're going to hit it. But if you start early enough, and you invest in yourself, you'd be surprised at what opportunities open. But I didn't want to get a disciplinary infraction, because I hadn't had a disciplinary infraction, and I worried that if I got an infraction, it might limit me to access other opportunities later. So in order to make sure I was okay, I went to the captain. Now the captain, this guy's name was Mike Babcock. He later became a warden. And I said, Captain, I have an opportunity to write a book. Are you going to give me a problem if I write a book from here? And Captain was honest. He said, truthfully, I don't know if you can write a book. Go ask your unit team. So I go to my unit team. They tell me, well, I don't really know, but let's find out from the region. So my case manager writes to the general counsel at the region's office. And they write back and they said, as long as you're not making any money, and as long as you're not inciting violence, you're within your rights to write a book. So I get this letter, I take it to the captain. I said, well, here's what the region wrote. And he says, well, it says right there, you can't make any money. And I said, that is exactly what it says, that I cannot make any money. So what if my sister signed the contract and the publishing company paid her? I have no rights to that money at that point. Would you give me a problem for that? And he said, well, it sounds like you're trying to get around the system. I said, no, Cap. What I'm trying to do is make sure that I get out of prison successfully. And he said to me, I've got enough problems in this penitentiary to think about. Writing your books is not going to be my priority. And I said, cool, can I get that in writing, Captain? You know, it wasn't that I didn't trust him. It's just that I know prison. And he may leave and there'll be somebody else and you get a disciplinary infractions and a parade of horribles will follow. So I get it in writing and it goes into my central file. And that's a very important point for you, right? All of these stories are going to relate to what I'm talking about later, okay? And I write the books and I start building, and all of this is still part of my plan. I've got an education, I'm contributing to society by building a support network, and thousands of people are getting to know who I am. And all of this really influences my journey through prison. So much so that something really magical happened for me later. A lot of times when you go to prison, everything falls apart. But if you invest in yourself, you can build. So I really learned the power of this in around 2001. You see, I graduated from Shorecrest High School in 1982. So in 2001, the high school was getting ready to put together a 20-year reunion. And the person who was coordinating that 20-year reunion, her name was Carol. And some student, I don't know who he is, was researching me because the internet had started by then. And when he was researching me, he found Shorecrest and he reached out and said, is this the same high school where Michael Santos went to school? And Carol gets the letter and she says, yeah, why are you asking? And he said, well, he's in prison. And I read his stuff and I'm writing a report on him. And that prompted Carol to look me up and she wrote me a letter in prison. But it wasn't the kind of letter a guy in prison wants to get. It was, you know, I'm a mother of 2 children, drugs are bad, you were always kind of a bad kid, I'm not surprised you're in prison, you know. And I read the letter and I remember showing it to my buddy and he said, well, she seems very angry with you. Well, that's a lesson for all of you. Even people you know, who you think you know, they may look at you differently once you have a number like I had, 163770004. And Carol looked at me like others did, even though I knew her. But being somebody who'd been through prison for a long time, I was always up for a challenge. And I told my buddy, I tell you what, give me a couple of weeks. I'll bet you I can change her mind. Maybe even make her my girlfriend. Bet you an ice cream. Like I said, you're not going to make her your girlfriend. So I said, let's try. I start writing letters to Carol. Yes, you're right. I made a lot of really bad decisions, but I was 20 years old then. I'm 35 years old now. I've done this, I've done that. And that led to softening her up a little bit. She started to correspond with me. After several months, she came to visit me, and we fell in love inside of a federal prison's visiting room. And on June 24th, 2003, I got married to Carol inside of a federal prison. So these are what I'm trying to share with you is even though you might be at the lowest part of your life right now, if you live in accordance with a plan, you can build your own pathway to success, however you define success, and we'll get into that more. But eventually, I get transferred. Even though my unit team had said, you'll never get out of a USP, which is a high security prison, a warden looked at the things that I had done, and unilaterally, he waived my public safety factors and I went to a medium. And then I went to a low. And when I was within 10 years of my release date, they sent me to a minimum security camp. Now, I know that none of you are going to believe this, but when I got to the camp, people were complaining. I mean, it was crazy. They'd complain about, the pillows weren't soft enough and my bed's super hard, and I just tell them, what are you talking about? You don't even know what prison is. But besides I'm interacting with them, I got to realize, geez, even though I'd been through hardship, they're separated from the people they love, the people who love them, and it really doesn't matter where you are. Anytime you're away from family, it hurts. And so you could start having empathy for other people. And I remember one guy, we'll call him Peter. He had been in prison for 20 years, and he was only about 6 or 7 months from getting home, and he was afraid of getting out of prison. And I said, why are you afraid? I can't wait to get out of prison. And he said, the truth is, I just don't know anybody out there. My parents have died. I've been in prison for 20 years. I don't have any friends out there, and I have no idea what I'm going to face. And I said, well, what have you done for 20 years? And that's a question that I would ask every one of you. What have you done since you've been in prison? What have you done since the day you learned that you were the target of a criminal investigation? In what ways have you built a plan that might make you a candidate for a higher level of liberty or for success? And Peter's answer was, well, for 20 years, I've always worked in facilities. I said, so what did you learn in facilities? Well, I've learned a lot. I've learned about plumbing, carpentry, electrical. I said, well, what's your best skill? He said, HVAC. I said, well, let's do a test. So Carol, being supportive of me, who'd moved from Oregon to New Jersey, now she moved out to Florence, Colorado, so she could visit me in the camp. And I asked Carol, I said, I want you to get me the names of every contractor in Salt Lake City, which is where Peter was going to go. Tell me the names of those businesses. And she sent me the names and the addresses. And then we did what? We wrote a letter. Very simple. No big deal. I'm Peter. I've been in prison for 20 years. If that turns you off, throw the letter away and forget about it. But I'd like to share with you how I can bring value to your company. You see, while I was in prison, I developed these skills. I learned how to do this, and that. And I'd like to make you an offer. If you will allow me to come back to your company, I will work for free for 2 weeks. And if you don't see me as the hardest working man on your team, the first to come, the last to leave, the most enthusiastic about servicing your company and your customers, I'll shake your hand and I'll thank you for the opportunity. But if you see me as a good candidate, I just hope you'll overlook my criminal background and give me a job. And through that effort, Peter had jobs waiting for him before he got out. That's something that anybody here can do. You see, it's never too early and it's never too late to start sowing seeds that will help you overcome the challenges in your future. But you've got to be the one that's architecting that strategy. You can't wait for the system to do it. That's not the system's mandate. It's your mandate. If you want to be the CEO of your life, you got to figure out, what can you do? Don't wait for somebody else to change it for you. Find a path, walk that path, memorialize your journey. I chose to do that all the way through because I always knew this was what I wanted to do when I got out of prison. But like all of you, I've heard stories about what you can and can't do when you get out of prison. Many of you may have heard these stories that when you get out of prison, you're not allowed to work for yourself or work for your family. Many of you may have heard that you can't travel. Many of you may have heard that you can't interact with other people who have a criminal background. I will tell you that is all true unless you do something about it. I knew what I wanted to do, and I would have to overcome those hurdles. But I didn't start preparing for them when I got out of prison. I started preparing before I got out. So I'd write a letter. I didn't know who my probation officer was, but I would just write a letter to U.S. Probation for the Northern District of California, because that's where I wanted to go. Very simple. My name is Michael Santos. I've been in prison since 1987. I'd really like to build a career around my journey, and I hope to do so with your support. I'd like to tell you what I've done since I've been in prison. I've earned this degree and published this book and that book. I built this support. I've built financial stability. But when I come home, I want to build a career to try to change the law for everyone. Because that's what I learned from Frederick Douglass. I didn't expect them to write me back. But 3 or 4 months later, I'd write another letter. 3 or 4 months later, I'd tell them what else I did. And this is a pattern that I would highly recommend you think about doing today. Because it's never too early and it's never too late to start sowing seeds for success. So I'll just give you a fast forward to the end of the story. When I got out of prison, I went to probation, and every one of them came to shake my hand and welcome me and said they'd been reading the letters, and they gave me permission to travel anywhere in the United States without having to ask for permission. They gave me permission to run my own business, and they gave me permission to interact with people who had a felony background. So you see, when a judge sentences you to the custody of the Attorney General, he also will impose some standard conditions of supervised release. But those conditions will be at the discretion of probation. Well, you have an opportunity to influence your probation officer in the future. And so I keep pushing, keep moving closer. And about 5 years before my release date, something else magical happens for me. First of all, I'd continued executing my plan. And I wrote a book when I was at Florence called Inside: Life Behind Bars in America. And when I wrote that book, the SIS, which is the custody, the head of security, called me and asked me about the book. And he said, you can't write books here from Florence because we have the ADX. He couldn't give me a discipline infraction because I had that letter in my file from Captain Badcock from before. So he says, but I'm still going to ship you. And he shipped me out to Lompoc, California. And when I got to Lompoc, California, that's the first time I met Andy Matavusian, who you may remember I spoke about, who was the warden then at USP Atwater. But when I met him for the first time, he was the captain of the prison. When you check into a prison, all the department heads come to see you. And he came to see me and he said, I know who you are. I know how long you've been in prison. And I know you're an author. But if you write a book from this prison, I'm going to lock you in the hole and I won't let you out until you finish your sentence. And so I didn't want to talk with him about the letter I had in my file because that was more like an ace in the hole. But I went to tell my wife when she moved out to Santa Barbara and she came to visit me. And I said, yeah, the captain says he's going to lock me in the hole and he'll keep me there until I get out if I write another book. And with all the wisdom of a woman, Carol said, well, then don't write a book. But that's what I do. I write books. My mission was never to be a model inmate. It was to make sure I would be successful when I got out. And so Carol was in nursing school at the time and she said, well, please just don't write a book, at least until I get my nursing license. I said, okay, I can do that. So I waited. She got her license. I published the next book and off to the hole I went. And when I went to the hole, Andy Matavusian, the captain, came to see me. He said, I told you couldn't write a book from this institution. And I said, well, evidently I can. And he said, well, you know what to do then, because you're not getting out of the hole. So I did know what to do. And I knew I was going to win because I knew I had that letter from from regional office that said I could write books. So I win. I file an administrative remedy. The region expunges my shot. And when the region expunged my shot, the captain came to see me again. He said, well, I'm still not going to let you out of the hole. That was fine. I knew what I had to keep doing, exercising my rights, and I did. And the Bureau of Prisons transferred me to a prison called Taft, California. And when I went to Taft, it was a private prison. I'm now a few years away from getting out. And I have to do the same thing that I'd been teaching others. Get ready for release. And at this time, I got out on August the 13th, 2012. I didn't get out of prison. I transferred to a halfway house. And when I got out, I had to get ready for that period of time. So it was around 5 years before, those of you who remember, we were in the greatest recession of our lifetime, 2007, 2008. And all you heard on the radio were job losses, unemployment rates going through the roof, foreclosures. And one thing I've learned is when there's crisis, there's also opportunity. And I wanted to build my career in real estate. So I did the same thing. I start writing letters, just like I had advised other people to do, just like I'm recommending that you do. My name is Michael Santos. I've been in prison since 1987. These are the credentials that I've built. I want to really learn about real estate, and I'd love to work for you for free, just so that I could learn. You send one letter out, maybe you don't get a response. Send letter after letter after letter, and somebody will respond. And I connected with a guy by the name of Lee. Lee was a very successful real estate developer, ran a $1 billion company. And somehow these letters connected. And Lee and I developed a friendship. Before I got out of prison, he would come to visit me, and he made me an incredible gift by telling me, I'm going to give you a place to live for a year, rent-free, and I'm going to give you a job. Now that is an amazing sense of comfort, because I'd had my own money in the bank, and now I had a job waiting for me and a place to live. So I get out on August the 13th, 2012. It was a Monday. Carol picks me up at the camp in Atwater, California, and she has to drive me to the San Francisco halfway house in the Tenderloin district. And when I get there, I have no idea what to expect, but Carol had given me this iPhone when I got out of prison. And I didn't know what the iPhone was or what the internet was or email or text, because none of that existed when I went to prison. So she's showing me how to use it, and I got there on a Monday to the halfway house, and that's all I did, is spend all my time on this app, on these phones, and learning these apps and so on. And I remember I'd made a very good friend in prison. His name is Justin Paperny. Some of you may know him. He runs White Collar Advice, and he's one of the biggest sponsors of our nonprofit. And I remember he was in Los Angeles, I was in San Francisco, and I'm telling him about this iPhone. On Thursday or Wednesday, they gave me the opportunity to go get my driver's license. But I had to walk from the halfway house to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and I had no idea how to get there. So I'm talking on the phone with Justin. He's kind of guiding me through the streets. Turn left here, go down this road, turn right. And it was just getting used to the world. But on Thursday, they gave me an opportunity to go get my clothes. And on Friday, for the first time, I get to go meet Lee in his office. And he's pretty excited for me. What's it like being back, and so on and so forth. And he's telling me what I'm going to do. And I'm telling him, well, Lee, remember, I'm working for you and I'm really grateful. But what I really want to do is change America's prison system. And he says to me, why do you keep thinking about prison? You just got out. Move on to the next chapter of your life. And I said, Lee, this is something that's like in me. It's a ministry. I got to try to change the system for everybody. And he said, well, how are you going to earn a living doing that? I said, I probably won't earn a living doing that. In fact, it'll probably cost me a lot of money. But it's one way I could bring meaning to the journey. I said, you know, Lee, here's the reason why. I said, I was as ready to go home after 8 years as I ever would have been. By then I had a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I was a published author. I mean, I was only 31 or 32. I could have built a business. I could have had a family, had a child, but I couldn't do any of that because I had to serve 18 more years in prison. And I want to change that because there are millions of people in prison that are going through that same injustice. And it's the greatest injustice of our time. And I really want to change it. And I want you to help me. And Lee said, I did try to help you. I gave you a job and a place to live. And I said, yeah, and I'm really grateful for that. But I want you to do something more. I want you to sell me a house. And he laughed and he said, sell you a house? Why do you want a house so bad when you got to do another year in the halfway house? And I said, Lee, I'm going to be good. If I'm successful, someday I'm going to go back into prisons. And I'm going to talk with people and I'm going to ask them to be a part of this mission of changing the law because I need them. But they are people that live with cynicism and they're angry. And in order for me to change them, I've got to be something different. I've got to be successful. And I want you to sell me a house so that I could show them what I'm talking about is not just happy talk, but it's really a pathway to emerge successfully. And if you sell me a house, it'll be a part of the story. And he said, well, do you have any money? And I said, yes, I have money. By the time I got out of prison, I'd accumulated close to $100,000 and I could show it to him. But I said, I don't want to use any of my money. And he said, why don't you want to use your money? I said, Lee, I just got out of prison. I'm going to need it to build my life. And he laughed. He said, okay. He said, well, do you have any credit? And I said, as a matter of fact, I learned that I do have credit. He says, how's that? I said, because my wife gave me this iPhone. And there's this little app here called Credit Karma. So I go to Credit Karma, I plug my little digit code in there. I said, check it out. I've got a 000 credit score. And he laughed. He said, let me see that. I've never seen a 000 credit score. I said, Lee, I didn't exist when the internet started. But you're a businessman. You invest today into projects that you didn't expect to bear fruit for 5 years. And I'm asking you, don't look at me as the guy who just got out of prison. Look at me for what I will be in 5 years. You saw how hard I worked in prison. I'll work 10 times harder. I need you to sell me a house. And he said, all right, I'll sell you a house and I'll finance the house, but I can't sell it to you cheap because it's the prices get recorded and I can't have prices going down in the neighborhood. But he said, I'm not going to have to pay a sales commission, so I'll put that towards your down payment. And he said, I'm also going to say, if you could stay this motivated while going through 25 years in prison, I want you to go speak at every one of my companies. And I'm going to pay you $5,000 for every speech. And I'm going to put it towards your down payment when you qualify for a mortgage. And that's how I bought my first house 4 days after transitioning from prison to a halfway house. And some people will say, well, you were really lucky. And I'll say, you're right. I was really lucky. But they don't know why I was lucky. I was lucky because Officer Wilson brought me a book about Frederick Douglass, and he brought me a book about Socrates. And those books changed the way that I think. And by changing the way that I think, I could start architecting a strategy that would lead to the result I wanted. What do you want? What is it that you want in your life? The sooner you start contemplating that, the more effective you're going to be at building a plan. And the next week, I remember I got an inquiry from the San Francisco Chronicle. And the journalist wrote me and said, hey, we've been following your story for several years and we'd like to write about your journey coming back to society. And I said, well, I'm not fully back to society because I'm still in the halfway house for a year. But if you want to write a story, I would welcome it. So they interviewed me and a big story comes out. And as a result of that story, I'm able to begin working more on speaking with Stanford and UC Berkeley and other universities. And when I'm at the University of San Francisco, they asked me after listening to the presentation if I wanted a job working there. And I had no idea what kind of job they wanted. I said, well, what is it that you want me to do? They said, we want you to be a professor. And I said, so that's all you got to do is go to prison for 25 years and you can be a professor? And they said, no. They said, the truth is, we use your books here at this university. And I studied your books when I was in graduate school. So I've known about you for more than 15 years. And we just think you would be a good member of the faculty. And that's really what's advancing my advocacy work. And I was very fortunate because I had a partner, Justin, who had built a business and he was kind of sponsoring this. This was always an idea. He would work on a commercial side and he would sell services, but the services would result in revenues that he would donate to a nonprofit that I wanted to build. And as a professor, I could start building more credibility. Everything was architected. And as a professor, I also have more opportunities to influence people. And I wrote an article at UC Hastings Law School, which is the law school affiliated with Berkeley, at least back in that day. And this article was called Incentivizing Excellence. And I wrote about this concept about we need to define the best possible outcome and create incentives so that people in prison will work toward those. And because of that article, I got an invitation from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to do a keynote speech for 1,000 people, every prosecuting attorney from the Western United States, all the federal judges, all the BOP officials and state officials from the Western United States. And when I make this presentation, at the end of it, I would always ask for help, just like I'm going to ask for help from you. But when I make it in that audience, people would say, well, not everybody could do what you did while you were in prison. And I said, you guys make that statement now because you see me here in 2015 wearing a suit in this audience. But your colleagues at the Department of Justice, when I came into the system, they said that regardless of what I did, I should be incarcerated for 300 years. See, the reality is anybody in prison could work toward becoming successful, could work toward becoming a law-abiding, contributing citizen. But prisons obliterate hope, and I need your help to change it. And that's what led to relationships with the Department of Justice, where I got to visit even as far away as Guam and Saipan to New York and Florida, and work with the DOJ in building these programs that eventually led to what you now see as the First Step Act. And after the speech, I'll always remember a guy in a blue suit. He comes up and he shakes my hand and he said, I just want to know, do you remember me? I said, of course I remember you. You're Andy Matavusian, the captain who locked me in the hole and said I'd stay there for the rest of my sentence. And he laughed and he said, well, I'm not a captain anymore. Now I'm a warden. And he said, I'd really like you to come out to my prison and make a presentation. I said, Warden, I'd love to come to your prison and make a presentation, but that's not enough. What am I going to go speak for 2 hours and motivate the people and rah, 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 and then walk out? He said, let me build a program that can help more people learn how to sow seeds today for the success they want to become in the future. And he said, well, if you could build a program like that, I will pilot it at USP Atwater, one of the most violent federal prisons in the nation. And that's what led to this course that we're going to talk about in the remainder of our presentation. That's the course that Haleem Flowers learned about and the path that he was on that led to him becoming free and becoming an influential citizen in the United States who speaks on the pathway to build a better life even while you're living through struggle. All of these people work in this capacity with hopes of helping more people get that outcome. But prisons obliterate hope. So we started at Atwater. It becomes successful. Warden Matavusian gets promoted and he becomes the warden at ADX, what's called an SEM warden, which is the highest level of warden. And he brings it to Colorado. And then he becomes a director of the Bureau of Prisons. Now he's a regional director. And he said, I want you to come and bring your program to every prison in the Northeast region, North Central region. So I started traveling a lot and going into prisons. But as happens with government, they ran out of money. And when they ran out of money, there's no money for the program. So we, thanks to sponsorship from White Collar Advice and Justin and other people who believe in the movement, I said, I don't need money from the government. I'll use my own money and money that other people provide to work to change the law, because I want to be a part of the solution that lets people work to earn freedom. But I need scale to get there. I need to get thousands of people involved. And I want you to allow me to go into prisons and persuade my brothers and sisters in prison on what role they have in getting the change that they want to see. Sometimes when I go into prisons, though, people will say, well, what do I do when I finish your course? And I said, well, in theory, if you've really mastered my course, you should know what to do, because you have to be the CEO of your life. But it always bothered me because I wanted to do more. And I used to speak in businesses and listen to business leaders. And I'll tell you one lesson I learned from a very successful business leader who, when we asked, what's the hardest thing you had to do in building your business? He said, during COVID, I had to lay off 2,800 people. And when I had to lay those people off, they were like laying off my family. So I wanted to help them. And I built a profile for every person and spoke about why they were extraordinary and compelling so that more opportunities would open for them. And I talked to my partners and I said, geez, we could do that. Let's build a program, a profile program that shows people how to memorialize their pathway to success. And that's really what Prison Professors has become, is a platform Think of a platform like Amazon. Amazon doesn't care what books it produces. It just produces books. Well, our platform at Prison Professors gives you an opportunity to show what makes you extraordinary and compelling. And we fund it. It doesn't cost anybody anything. We've gone through so many stages to get to where we are because we need to get to 10,000 people. Why 10,000? Well, at 10,000 people, we start to develop what's called statistical significance, where we can get Stanford or Berkeley or UC Irvine to do a study and show, hey, here's 10,000 people who are documenting their journeys, demonstrating why they are a worthy candidate for a higher level of liberty. And let's compare them to people who are not in the program. And I believe what you're going to find is these people are less likely to engage in disciplinary infractions and more likely to engage in self-directed pathways to prepare for success. But we've even gamified it to make it easier. So the program is designed in such a way that anybody can participate. Ideally, what we want is somebody to engage with their family or friends or loved ones outside. So we've created an email address for every federal prison. For example, it's Lompoc at prisonprofessors.org. It's Atwater at prisonprofessors.org. It's Florence at prisonprofessors.org. It's Miami at prisonprofessors.org. And anybody who sends us an email there, our team will get. But the best way to enroll, we believe, is to have your family. Just go to prisonprofessors.org. They can hit the enroll button and they could say, I am enrolling on behalf of a loved one. And they'll enter your first name, your last name, your registration number, the prison where you're confined, and then that enrolls you in the program. It's free. We fund it. Nobody is ever going to pay for anything on Prison Professors. But then the third way is if maybe you don't have family outside, maybe you don't have access to the TrueLinks email system, but you could always use a stamp and you could send it to our team. And if you send this information to our team, your name, your number, you want to enroll, great, you're enrolled. Once you're enrolled, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to send you a book. That book is called The Playbook. No big deal. Prison Professors Playbook. And it's going to explain a little bit about how the program works, but then it's up to you. You got to do 4 things. 1, write your biography. Your biography is essential. If you don't write your biography, it's always going to be the PSR or the DOJ press release that defines your life. It's super important to define who you are. What makes you extraordinary and compelling? You don't necessarily have to write about your crime, but you do have to write about the story that you want other people to read when they see you. And the more in depth you get, the stronger you become. So when we send you the playbook, we'll give you examples, we'll give you a lesson, but then you've got to take the next step and write your biography and publish it on your profile. The second component is a daily journal. It doesn't have to be daily. Maybe it's a couple times a week. Maybe it's weekly. The important thing is you're showing how hard are you working to overcome the complications of imprisonment. It's very easy to complain. It's very easy to say what the prison system isn't doing. What's harder is to figure out how are you architecting a strategy that will position you for success. The harder you work on yourself, the more opportunities are going to open. So that's the second component. Write some daily journals. Before I tell you the third component, I'm going to ask you a question, as I ask everybody in the audiences where I present. How many of you consider yourselves readers? And whenever I ask that question, every hand goes up. But I'll say, well, you're a reader? Say, yeah. I said, well, how long have you been in prison? Somebody will say, 4 years, 3 years, a year, 7 years, 19 years, whatever. I'll say, well, how many books have you read? Without exception, the answer I hear is a lot. Hundreds of books, thousands of books, 50 books. Oh, I don't know, but a lot. Too many to count. And my answer to them is always, I just want you to know why you've squandered an opportunity. You've squandered an asset. And they'll say, why? I say, because the world is about being deliberate and intentional. And what you want to say is something along these lines. I've been in prison for 50 months, and I'm happy to celebrate that I've just read my 150th book. And the reason I know that is because I set a goal of reading 3 books every month. Some months I read 5, some months I read 2, but I met my goal. It's 50 months, I read 150 books, and every book I read, I wrote a book report. And the book report's no big deal. Why did I choose to read the book? What did I learn from reading the book? And how will this book contribute to my success upon release? Now, if you had those 150 books, reports, what you've got is an asset that you can use to advocate for yourself. You see, the one thing that everybody watching this video wants is to get the highest level of liberty at the soonest possible time. But as the great basketball coach Bobby Knight said, everybody has the will to win. Not everybody has the will to prepare to win. You've got to prepare today for the success that you want to build in the future. And your book reports become an asset that you use in your self-advocacy. Demonstrate why you're different. Publish them on your profile. The last component that you'll learn in this book is to write your release plan. You've got to be the architect of your future. This demonstrates that you are self-directed, that you don't wait for somebody to move the needle in your life. You figure out how to do it, and your release plan will show you. Now, what we've done is we've created a technology platform that assigns points. The harder you work on yourself, the more points you're going to earn, because that's what's called America. The harder you work, the more opportunities open. Prison is as close as we come in the United States to communism. When you go in there, right, you serve the state, the individual doesn't matter. They tell you what you can eat, when you can eat, what you can wear, with whom you can visit, what books you can read, right, who you can talk to. It completely controls your life in a total institution. And the only thing that matters is how many calendar pages then turn. But that's not America. In America, if you work hard, you rise higher. And we want people to invest in themselves. We want people to be the CEO of their life. So what we've done, based on what I have learned, is we want to incentivize people to develop stronger communication skills. If you can learn to communicate better, to write better, you are going to be in a better position to overcome the hurdles that complicate life for so many others. Getting a job, getting credit, getting housing, launching the next phase of your life. So, if you write 300 words or less, you're going to get 1 point for every entry. If you write more than 300 words on every entry, you're going to get 2 points every time you write more than 300 words. Because in theory, if you write a lot, you're going to develop confidence as a writer. I know that it took me many years to develop confidence as a writer. But once I developed those skills, I opened opportunities that very few people thought would be possible, just like you can do. And so these points that you accumulate will show up on a leaderboard. And there's 3 ways to measure your points. One way is just on your own work. Build those points up and you'll get to the top of the leaderboard and people will take notice. I was traveling with Deputy Director Eric Williams. He's the Regional Senior Deputy Director for the North Central region. And we were traveling from one prison to another. I was showing him the website. Well, we're going to Leavenworth. Let's look at the hardest working guy in Leavenworth. And we just pull up his points and I'd read what the guy wrote in his biography and his journals. And I would tell him, this is the type of filter that you should be using to push him to minimum security or to home confinement or to a furlough or to work release programs. And that's the movement, right? That's the movement. Are you going to be a part of the movement? Your individual points will determine whether you're a better candidate. The second way is if you build a tribe. We want you to build your own circle of influence. So if you're in the prison and you meet Steve, and Steve didn't get an opportunity to watch this project, you tell Steve to enroll, he enrolls in the program. Well, for going through it, we'll send Steve the book. Steve will get the points, but you will get the same points that Steve gets. And if Steve enrolls Tom, Tom will get points, Steve will get Tom's points, but you will also get Tom's points because you're becoming a part of something bigger. Now imagine when you go to ask for early termination of supervised release, how strong that will look. If you've got points that shows you influence 50 people or 100 people and you help to change the culture of confinement, that's what a judge wants to see. So you've got to architect that strategy. And so those points will help you do so. But it would be hard for Tom or Steve to rank at the top of the leaderboard against Bob, who may have been in prison for 10 years, who has a lot of points. So we've added a third component. Who's worked the hardest in the last 30 days? And we measure who's gotten the most points every 30 days. So now you've got people all over the country competing against each other. In fact, I'll tell you about Celeste Blair. Celeste was serving a 30-year sentence at the federal prison in Aliceville, Alabama. And when I was getting started, I reached out to anybody I knew, told them about the program, and Celeste decided to become an ambassador. And she not only developed her own profile, but she helped hundreds of others do the same. As a result, she went to the top of the program. And when other advocacy groups like Families Against Mandatory Minimums or Aleph Institute reached out and said, hey, we want to push people for clemency, who do you recommend? I said, well, I don't know anybody in prison, but you should look at the leaderboard. They did. They chose Celeste, and President Biden commuted her sentence, and she's now home. That can be the case for you. I don't know that what's going to happen in your life, but I know that the harder you work on yourself, the more you are going to stand out. And that's what we want you to do. In fact, there's a great author, Seth Godin, who tells this story about standing out. And I'm going to, I always like to learn from leaders and people who are smarter than me. And he wrote this book that has a great analogy. He says, if you're driving down the road and you see a pasture filled with cattle, typically what people do is they roll up the windows because the cows all stink and they just drive right by. Okay? But if somebody saw a purple cow in that pasture, everybody would stop and look. And when I read that story, I knew it was about marketing and business, but I could relate to it. Because when you're in prison, all you are is a cow. That's what you are to the entire system. And you stink. So expect that people will see you that way, unless you become a purple cow. Your profile will help you stand out and become a purple cow. And that's what I want for you, to become the best in the world at something. And I want the people who are going to prison in Lompoc to compete against the people who are in Florence, to compete against the people who are in Miami, to compete against the people who are in Otisville and Sheridan, right? Anywhere. And you want to rise to the highest level. This is how you work toward earning freedom. And I use this tool to advocate with the Bureau of Prisons for more pathways to work release programs, to furloughs, to making sure that every person, regardless of criminal conviction or nationality, qualifies for time credits. This is a path, and every one of you has a role in advancing this path. So that's why I'm asking you, get involved, become a part of our community. And if you do that, then we're going to send you another book. You see, none of you will know how hard I work or how many hundreds of thousands of dollars we have to invest to keep this program going. But we'll know how hard you're working. Because anybody can ask for a book and you'll immediately get 1 point. But if you only get 1 point, I'll see that on the leaderboard and I'll know you didn't work very hard. You didn't work hard enough to earn freedom. But if you do, and you start accumulating, you've written a biography, you wrote a journal entry, you wrote a book report, and you wrote a release plan, well, guess what's going to happen next? Our team is going to send you another book. We're going to pay for it. You don't pay for anything, but you've got to invest in yourself. So write the next book report, write more journal entries. And the second book we're sending is called Earning Freedom, Conquering a 45-Year Sentence. That's where you will see I'm not asking you to do anything I didn't do. But then the third book we'll send you is actually the First Step Back course. It's called Preparing for Success After Prison. And this course has 10 parts. No big deal. 10 parts. We call it the Straight A Guide. You've heard my story. You've heard how I use this in my life, but how do you use it in your life? Well, there's 10 modules. I'd love to say this was my idea and I came up with it, but that wouldn't be accurate. This is what I've learned from leaders, from business people who know what it means to be the CEO of your life, just like you have to be. You see, the first module is going to focus on defining success. What is it for you? It's going to be different for you than the person that you're next to. And it's going to be different at one stage of your life than at another stage of your life. But you are the CEO of your life, so you have to know what it is. For me, while I was in solitary, I knew I wanted to build a career that would help hundreds of thousands or millions of people get out of prison. Because I got inspired by Frederick Douglass, and that's what he did. What is it that you want to do? I don't know your story, but guess what? Nobody else does either. So you've got to define success. And that's what you'll learn how to do in Module 1. The second module is to set clear goals. Goals that align with success, not as I defined it, but as you defined it. Remember, Module 1, you defined it. What are the goals? In my case, I said I wanted to get an education, I wanted to contribute to society, I wanted to build a support network. The goals, okay, within 10 years, I need to get a university degree. Within 10 years, I need to become a published author. Within 10 years, I need to build a support network of 10 people that I don't know and that don't know me. That's very clear. I've defined success, and I set the goals that aligned with how I define success. The third module is you got to have the right attitude. You can't fake it. You got to make 100% commitment to success, not as I defined it, but as you defined it in Module 1. That's the right attitude. So you learn more about that in Module 3. In Module 4, you learn about the importance of aspiring to something bigger than you. Okay? What really got Frederick Douglass through the journey, he wasn't only thinking about himself, he wanted to think about all the people that were enslaved. And in being inspired by him, I'm thinking about all of you. Even though I finished my sentence in 2013, every day I'm immersed in the prison system because we're working to change it. But we need your help. We need your help. So to get through the difficult times, you've got to aspire to something bigger. The next module in the course, right? Define success, set goals, have the right attitude, aspire. The fifth module is you've got to take action. You can't talk about wanting to be successful. You got to do it. You got to take steps every single day. And it's the little steps that you take that will put you on a pathway to more opportunities. The sixth module is about holding yourself accountable. You got to be for real. If you know what you want to accomplish in 5 years, then you should know what you want to do in 3 years. You should know what you want to do in 1 year. You should know what you have to do next week. Create accountability metrics. That's what your profile will become. The seventh module, you got to keep your head in the game. We call that module awareness. Every opportunity that opened for me, that opened for Haleem, that opened for Tommy Walker, that opened for Adam Clausen, was available to every other person in federal prison. We're not special. We're one of you. You may see us outside right now, but it's up to you. So if you're keeping your head in the game, you're seeing the opportunities that are available to you. But something else is happening. The world is becoming aware of you, and they're investing in you because you're for real, right? I cannot tell you how many people in the agency, the Bureau of Prisons, helped me along the way, starting with Officer Wilson bringing me books, then a warden who waived my public safety factor, then a university that let me into school, then a publishing house that allowed me to publish books, then a woman who allowed me to marry her from inside of a federal prison, then business opportunities that opened that allowed me to build financial resources while I was in prison, then a business partner that had said, hey, I'm going to build a business, but I'll sponsor your nonprofit, then so many others. But it's not about me. It's about you. You've got to keep your head in the game. Number 8, you got to be authentic. When I go to a high security penitentiary, I always ask them, I said, let me ask you, if I came in here and said, I want to be the shot caller of this prison, how long is that going to take for people to figure out I'm really not a shot caller? And within seconds, everybody's kind of laughing. And I tell them, you see, you look at me and you know I'm not a shot caller because I may not look hard enough. But I got a little secret for you. That was the plan, to come out of prison with your dignity intact and with opportunities to prosper, nobody knowing you ever served a day in prison unless you told them. And that's what I want for everybody that's in prison. But there's a flip side to that. Just like you could assess that I'm not a shot caller, if you come back to society and you're not ready, it also takes about a second for people to know. And that's what leads to unemployment, underemployment, homelessness, further problems with the law, and a return trip to federal prison. So make sure you're for real. The 9th module in the course is going to talk about celebrating the little achievements. You've got to have the fortitude to stay with it all the way through the journey. And if you stay with it through the journey, then you're building. Then your profile demonstrates that you are extraordinary and compelling. And then the 10th module is to live in gratitude, appreciative of all the blessings that have come your way. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am for the many blessings that came my way. And I still feel that way today. I felt that way while I was in prison. But again, it's not about me. This story is about you. So if you go through those 3 first books and you continue to develop your program, our team will continue to send you books. Because all of this is part of our incremental commitment to change. Right now, and we're filming this just before November 2025. In fact, today is Halloween, October the 31st, as we're filming this at the Christian Podcast Studio, thanks to Beto and his lovely wife. But I'll tell you something. Today, what we're building is a pathway to persuade very cynical people on why you should have an opportunity to earn freedom. To earn freedom means you have to do your part. So if we have about close to 4,000 people enrolled right now, our goal is to get to 10,000 people. Then we've got to take our resources and we've got to hire Stanford. We got to hire Berkeley. We got to hire UC Irvine. We got to hire universities to do this study. Then they become published. When we have that asset, that gives us more influence when we're talking with the Bureau of Prisons, when we're talking with federal probation, and we're asking them to look at your profiles as a validation of why you're a good candidate for higher levels of liberty or early termination of supervised release or clemency. We want to use this to speak with employers and to show people who are memorializing and documenting their story are great candidates for the job market. Maybe we even want to raise more money for our nonprofit where we can do a Shark Tank-like experience in every prison. And we'd give you an opportunity to pitch us on something. Maybe you want us to see us as a judge, and you're going to convince us why you're worthy of compassionate release. Or maybe you want to pitch us on an idea for funding, to ask us for venture funding to launch your business. Maybe you want a loan to help you get started. Maybe you want a grant to help you go to school. I don't know what you want, but I know it's your job to persuade others that you're a worthy candidate for something. That's what you're going to learn how to do in our course. And if you build your profile on Prison Professors, that's what you're going to learn how to do. So to recap all of that, there's 3 ways to get involved. We hope that you will have your family visit prisonprofessors.org and enroll you. Once we have your name and your number, you get started by us sending you books. If you don't have a family, but you do have email, send us an email. It's very easy. In fact, the universal email is interns@prisonprofessors.org. Send that out to us. Our team will have your name and number. They'll send you the first book. It's up to you to do the work, and then we'll send you the next book. Or 3, if you don't have family and you don't have email, just write us a letter. I'd tell you the address, but I don't know it by heart. You'll find it around the prison because our books are everywhere. But this is the strategy that you need. And what I'd like to do now, because I've been speaking for quite a while now, and I'm very surprised that I've gotten very few questions. So this is a time when I kind of transition to Q&A, and I'm going to kind of pause here, and we'll refilm with the questions, and I'll respond. And I'll tell you, there's nothing you can't ask me about my time before prison. There's nothing you can't ask me about my time during prison. And there's nothing you cannot ask me about what I've done since I've come home. Because we always make 3 promises. We'll never lie to you. We'll never ask you to do something we didn't do. And we'll never charge anybody a penny for anything on Prison Professors. So any questions in the audience?
When you started your sentence, were there a lot of inmates who just resented your drive and desire to become better? And did you ever consider quitting because of how they were trying to influence you?
That's a great question, and I get it a lot of times in various prisons, so I'm glad you asked it. The truth is it was different for me because a number of reasons. One, I was in the hole for a year. So when I was in the hole for a year, as I said, I didn't get that message of how you're supposed to serve time in prison. So by the time I got to prison, I was in a high security penitentiary. And in a high security penitentiary, there's a lot of negativity there. There's a lot of hopelessness in there. There's a lot of people feeling as though, regardless of what they do, nothing matters. But I was really blessed that I read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass or Socrates or Nelson Mandela's books, stories, or Viktor Frankl's stories, or so many other people who really taught me what it means to overcome, to be the CEO of your life. And to be the CEO of your life is not very difficult. You got to identify a problem like everybody who listens to me has to do. All of us are human beings, and being a human being just means you deal with struggle and problems. Some people let those problems define them. Some people come up with a plan. Some people put priorities in place. Some people build tools, tactics, and resources and execute the plan, adjusting as necessary. That's what the profile is. I didn't have a profile when I started, but I had a plan. And that plan allowed me to believe, as many people say, you can please some of the people sometimes, but you can't please many of the people all the time. And the people who were telling me the right way to serve time, those were not going to be the people that governed my decisions. So yes, there were people, as I said earlier in the presentation, that wanted to discourage me. Don't go to school, don't work so hard, don't do it, because nothing's going to matter. But those weren't the people I wanted to impress. I mean, it's a funny story that you asked that question. I say this a lot of times in prisons, that when you're in prison, right, everybody says they hate being in prison, but not everybody prepares. I was in a restaurant last night. There might have been 100 people in that restaurant. I didn't know any of them. And guess what? I didn't care about them. But if you go to prison, the first question is, let me see your paperwork. Who do you run with? Where do you sit? Where are you from? Right? All that's a pathway for living in prison. I hated living in prison. And I wanted to be successful when I got out. So I never let those kinds of discouragements define who I am. And that's what I would encourage everybody in this audience. Define what you want and then go get it. I hope that's responsive to your question.
Someone asked about, in your books, you never come off as a victim. You accept responsibility. But what about someone who feels the sentence is too long, maintaining their innocence, and they're here? Like, how do you be accountable and be productive when you feel like there's just this injustice?
Yeah, for me, when you ask how did I do it, that's the only thing I could answer. I looked at people that I believed had real injustice, like Frederick Douglass. He was born as a slave. And even though he was born as a slave, he chose to live to try and help other people. There was Socrates, who wanted to help other people. When you focus on living on something bigger than yourself, you realize that there's always something you can do. You cannot control the world. You can control how you respond to the world. And I'm not going to dispute that many people go through injustice. I've known people who shouldn't be in prison at all, but that's not relevant. I've known people that should have gotten cancer. I've known people that shouldn't have gotten in a car accident. I've known people that shouldn't have faced a financial reversal. But there's this thing that we all go through, and it's called life. And life is about living in the world as it exists and not complaining and not expecting somebody else to change it. In America, you got to work to be strong. You got to develop confidence. And you can only do that by working through a plan. At least that's what I learned. And I hope that you find that responsive to your question.
Someone asked about rejection. In a book you wrote that you were like a fisherman at sea, like casting lines, writing letters after letters. Was there ever a point where you were writing so many letters and you'd go to mail call and think no one is responding and you just continued? Walk us through just writing letters and maybe just not getting a response for weeks or months.
Yeah, I think that is a great question because prison is really, we try to find the good in everything. And one of the good things about prison is it teaches you how to deal with rejection. And to really develop that analogy, it's really a biblical analogy from the Old Testament. I think it was the Old Testament where Jonah's on the catches a fish, or something to do with a fish. But I remember writing about that and saying, there's a lot of ways to catch a fish. I could go to the ocean and open my arms and say, fish, I command thee, jump into my arms. Maybe it will happen. It's probably not going to happen. You might take a better shot by taking a fishing pole and a line and casting a line out there without a hook. Probably unlikely a fish is going to get tangled up in that line and get caught. A hook with some bait might be better, right? But 100 hooks, 1,000 hooks out there, you got a better shot. Yes, you're going to face rejection. But if you push it, you're going to find little victories. And those little victories are going to put you on the pathway to something better. The reality is when you're facing a crisis, any kind of crisis, you need to say, okay, if I execute this plan and I do this and I do that and I do that, I'm going to put myself on the pathway to something better. I always would say, as I learned from the financial sector, if there is a better than 0% chance of advancing the ball, take it. Work hard. Invest in yourself. And that's what you have to do. So is there a better chance of connecting with somebody if I keep writing? Yes. Look at how that happened for so many people. Haleem Flowers was serving double life, and he's now home. Because of all the work he did on himself, he eventually found lawyers to believe in him, a judge to believe in him, and the owner of the Golden State Warriors to believe in him. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Yes, you're going to face rejection, but nobody can change the past. All you can do is sow seeds for the future. In fact, I'd love to give you one more analogy. It's kind of a famous analogy. It's not mine. Part of it's not mine. Part of it is. I like to ask guys in the audience, when is the best time of year to plant a seed if you want to grow an oak tree? And inevitably, I get all kinds of answers. Sometimes people say, when it's raining on a weekend, in the fall, in the summer, right? People don't know. But the analogy would tell us that the best time to plant the seed, if you want to grow an oak tree, is 20 years ago. All of us would like to make decisions 20 years ago that would have put us on a different path than we're on right now. The second best time to plant the seed for an oak tree is today. But the analogy that I've developed, that's the analogy that's pretty famous. Here's how I've kind of modified it for people in prison. Because if you want to grow an oak tree, it's not just digging a hole, right? Here's the dirt, digging a hole, putting a seed in there and walking away. To grow the oak tree, something strong that can withstand struggle, right? You got to nurture it. And you nurture that ground with fertilizer. And fertilizer is manure, right? So there's manure over the ground, the seeds underneath it. To grow an oak tree, you got to grow through the manure. And if you're in prison, be prepared to grow through a lot of manure before you become a strong oak tree. Deal with rejection. Don't make excuses. Keep fighting. And keep building.
Someone asked about your initial release. Was anything you wish you'd have done differently in those early weeks or months? You look back and say, I'd have maybe done that differently?
Well, I think that what I would have done differently in those initial weeks and months is I would have tried to have learned more about the system and not just listen to my defense attorney. My biggest decisions that had an influence on my life, first of all, was selling cocaine in the first place, but I couldn't change that. Yet once I was arrested, I could have made better decisions. I didn't have to go to trial and take the witness stand and hire a defense attorney who told me what I wanted to hear rather than what I needed it to hear. I should have taken steps to learn more about, well, what would the system expect of me because I did wrong? Probably should have accepted responsibility, expressed remorse, identified with the victims of my crime, figured out what can I do to make things better, persuade a judge that maybe I was a good candidate for reconciliation or atonement. So maybe I wouldn't have gotten a 45-year sentence. So I made a lot of bad decisions in those first days, weeks, and months. But after Officer Wilson brought me the story of Frederick Douglass and Socrates and Viktor Frankl, I learned that the responsibility is mine to build something better. And for that, I could be very grateful.
Okay, one.
So any more questions out there in the audience?
Someone wants to ask how do people respond when how do you describe to someone that you served like 26 years in prison? Like, how does someone, what do you do, Michael? Or where are you from? How do people respond when they hear that?
Yeah, it's a great conversation starter for me. I mean, the reality is a lot of people are embarrassed and humiliated that they've been in prison, but this is a strength for me. In fact, the first thing I would say is, you know, I was in prison for 26 years. What? You? I mean, the reality is sometimes I go into prison and people don't know my whole story. And they'll think I'm a probation officer or a lawyer or somebody coming in there that speaks. You know, they'd say I don't look hard enough. You know, when I tell them I was in prison, yeah, that fool was never in prison. I said, you see, you think you're giving me an insult because I don't look hard enough. But I always have a little secret for you. That was the plan, to get out of prison, be able to walk into any room, build any business you want to build, become as successful as you want to be, and have nobody judge you because you were in prison. My story is not about having been in prison for 26 years. It's about what steps did I take to try and make the world better for thousands, millions of people. How do I persuade people to collaborate with me, build a coalition, change the law? Those are magnificent hurdles and obstacles. And if I could overcome them, it'll make the journey a little bit more meaningful. And that's what life is about, helping other people reach their highest potential. That's what drives me. Yeah, I got a lot of complications and struggle, but it's not having been in prison. That's not the limiting factor for me. And I hope it's not for anybody that's going through our programs.
You touched on this earlier, but it comes up again. Someone said, I wish I saw this right when I went to prison, and now I'm nearing my release. I wish I heard it a long time ago. Is it not too late for me? I'm going home really soon. And
I always say it's never too early and it's never too late to start sowing seeds for a better life. But you've got to live in the world as it exists. And if you were slow getting started, then accelerate. I was slow. I got out at 49 years old. I'm 62. I'll be 62 in a couple of months. And for me, the things that I am doing right now are very different from what I did when I got out of prison. They're very different than what I did when I went into prison, because all of those incremental steps put me on a pathway to different opportunities. And my life is about building an impact. I wish I could have done it when I was 30. I wish I could have done it when I was 20. But I didn't get out of prison until I was 49. And so it's never too early and it's never too late.
Someone asked about visiting with family, that they didn't want family to come and see them there. It's harder to see them in visitation with such a long sentence. Did you ever not see your family or discourage them to come and see you?
No. For me, that was the pathway for somebody who wants to live in prison. For me, the pathway was always to connect with society. And I am very grateful to my sister Julie, my sister Christina, my parents, my grandparents who supported me. Eventually, women came into my life. I married the love of my life inside of a prison during my 15th or 16th year. I met business leaders who opened opportunities for me. I met a sponsor who built a business and has donated well over $1 million to allow me to do what I want to do. So no, I always wanted to connect with society because I didn't want to live in prison. I hated living in prison. And I would ask you, do you hate living in prison? If you hate living in prison as much as I hate living in prison, you will realize that it's your job, your opportunity to define success and build a path. You can't change the past, but you can sow seeds for a better future.
Someone asked if there's anything you miss about prison.
Well, I go back to prison a lot. It's just now I got to walk out. What did I miss about prison? No, I mean, I really did hate being in prison. There's nothing I missed about being in prison. Prison is a very stifling experience, and it's a big part of my life, but certainly it is not, there's nothing I miss about prison. Prisons is the greatest social injustice of our time, and it makes me very sad when I go into prison because I see so many people with so much potential that could reach such a higher path and purpose and could be great, prosperous American citizens and working to build a phenomenal future for their children. But I can't do anything about that. I can only show them the path that worked for me. And I want them to see that they need to get a plan together, because if they don't get a plan together, they should know that the system has a plan for them. And I don't think they're going to like the result. That plan is to look at how many people are in prison and then to figure out how many prison cells do we need to build in the future. Not only to bring people back, but to bring their children inside as well. How many welfare programs and things do we need to create because the homeless population is going to increase? No, I think prisons are a great disservice to the American population. There's nothing I miss about it. It's one of the reasons that I work so hard to try and change it for every person who's going through it.
Someone asked about respect, saying it's clear you earned respect. How do you think you earned that respect inside?
You know, there's a big difference between respect and fear. Many people in prison want to have people fear them, and they equate that with respect. But that's not respect. Respect is to believe in yourself and to believe that you have a purpose in living within a society or within a community. To believe that you are working towards something in an intentional, methodical, deliberate way. That's how you build respect. And for me, what was super important was to prove worthy of the many blessings that have come my way. It's like that story, as I told you, the biblical story, the parable of the talents. If you work hard, opportunities are going to open for you. But if you have gifts, God gave you gifts, and you do not exercise those gifts, God will make things harder for you. You can read about that in so many stories, whether it is the story of Job, the book of Job, whether it is a story of, just Joseph, so many other areas. But one thing I would argue is that every individual has to find a way, and it's really the foundation of our course. You start by defining success in your life. If you can do that, then you can start restoring confidence and start working. And that's how you build respect, by knowing that you are the CEO of your life. You are architecting a future. You are not letting the walls or the system define you. You're building something better. And that's what I encourage everybody to do.
Someone asked about seeing friends go home, and it's hard not to be jealous or a little envious. You saw so many.
Yeah, that's pretty weak.
Yeah.
If you cannot experience joy when something good happens to somebody else, then you should look at yourself, because that is living as a pathetic human being. You are a victim, and you're not strong, and you should not be proud of that. You should be grateful when you see somebody you care about having something better. There's this theory that says called crabs in the bucket, right? You put a bunch of things in the bucket, a bunch of crabs, and one of them crawls out. They're not all cheering for the one getting out. They all band together and try and pull them back in, right? That is a pathetic way to live. It is not going to lead to happiness or fulfillment or confidence or the life that you want. Life is about having love in your heart and believing that everybody else can achieve something else, and to recognize that we all have flaws. And as human beings, we all face obstacles. And our job is to help others overcome those obstacles. And that's when you start to restore strength and confidence and feel as if you're leading a life of meaning and relevance and dignity. Go ahead. What's the next question?
Someone asked about the biggest reason when you were in the halfway house or coming home, you see people going back to prison for violations or things like that. What do you think the biggest problem is?
The biggest problem is that you don't have a plan and you don't understand the complications ahead. and you don't know how to define success, and you don't know how to hold yourself accountable. I can give you so many examples of people who've gone back to prison that never should have went to prison in the first place. One of the stories I frequently tell is the story of Gary. Gary was a lawyer, and he was a CPA, and he went to prison for a business-related offense. But when he got out of prison, he believed it was behind him. The problem is he expected probation to be responsive to his needs, and that's generally not the way the system works. So when he asked for permission to travel within a certain time and his probation officer ignored that request, Gary learned a lesson. And that lesson was, I'm not even going to tell probation. And so during his time of supervised release, he would travel outside of his jurisdiction without asking permission. All was fine until he was about 6 months away from completing his term. And that's when his probation officer said, okay, now bring in all of your receipts from credit cards. And the probation officer looked at those receipts. She saw that Gary had gone to San Francisco, that he had gone to Seattle, that he'd gone to Denver, he'd charged hotels in Florida. And she said, I never authorized these trips. And she issued a violation. A federal judge found him to be non-compliant with the conditions of his supervised release, and he came back to prison. And when he came back to prison with a new 5-month sentence, his wife came and told him, I did this with you once. I'm not doing it again. And the whole life, the spiral of failure continues. So I would encourage people to really understand the game, understand the journey, and figure out how can you be the best in the world at what you're supposed to be the best in the world at.
You mentioned you were ready for your release after 8 years. Was there ever a window where you thought maybe a commutation or pardon, or you're going home, or were you walk us through any hope you had?
I had hope all the way through because I was always architecting the strategy. And the strategy would help me focus on what could I do, not what somebody else could do. So certainly I put in petitions for clemency. I think I submitted at least 3 or 4, but a president never commuted my sentence. It was a different era, very different from today. When I went to prison, there were about 35,000 people in federal prison. It's since ballooned to more than 200,000 people. It's not that Americans all of a sudden became more lawless. It's just that the system moved in the direction of mass incarceration. So I tried in many ways, and many times people came into my life and wanted to help me. One former U.S. attorney wrote to me and connected with me, through Carol, and said that he wanted to invest time and energy to help me get out of prison. I mean, this is a sitting prosecutor. It was so emotional for me to get that news, that his name was Sam Sheldon, that, it actually brought tears to my eyes, and I had to excuse myself from the visit and go to the bathroom and cry because I couldn't believe a prosecutor wanted to work to get me out. And he put together a stellar team of defense attorneys who made an effort, but it was not the right time. And so I never got out, but I certainly had hope. And the hope was not that a judge was going to let me out. It was just the fact that people believed in me, and I believed in myself. And that's what kept me going through the entire journey.
On a lighter note, someone wanted to know, what do you do for fun? Because you seem to work a lot.
This is what I do for fun. There's nothing that brings me more joy than to try and help people who live without hope find a pathway to build a better life. And I mean, I can tell you, it's the fall of 2025. We're about to go to November. And I could just tell you, since September, these are the prisons that I visited. There's 32 locations. Victorville. What was next? Victorville, Hazleton, Morgantown. What was next? Otisville, Canaan, Danbury, Leavenworth, Sandstone, Rochester, Duluth, Waseca, Atlanta, Miami, Coleman, Hurlong. That's 15. That's where I am right now. On Sunday, a couple of days from now, I'm traveling to go to Kentucky, where I'll visit Ashland, Big Sandy, Manchester, McCreary, Lexington. Then after that, I'll come back and I'll have to travel to Milan, then Sheridan, then Florence, then Inglewood. Then I've got these all in my head. Then I go back to West Virginia, and I'll go to Alderson, Gilmer, I don't know, McDowell, USP Lee. There's 32 locations is what I know. And in every one of those locations, I present 2 to 8 times. So it's a massively heavy lift. But for me, it's a tremendous amount of work, but it's also incredibly meaningful because it gives me the opportunity to be something like Frederick Douglass did, trying to bring liberty to people he left behind. And I just hope that you'll become a part of the movement and do your part in helping us lower disciplinary infractions and raise self-directed reentry plans so that we could become the change that we want to see in the world.
Last question. Someone asked if you ever found boredom on the inside, or were you always just like, did you relax? What did you do for any enjoyment while you were there?
Well, for enjoyment was always being productive. It was always working toward the next goal. And it's very important to work toward goals, and they're incremental stages. So you don't have time to relax in prison. What you have time to do is to build. And I'm a builder. So I was always building, working to get an education, working to become a published author, working to build a support network, working to persuade or influence people to believe in me, then working to create something of value, then figuring out how am I going to overcome it, then finding a partner that could help me solve some of the complications and raise financial resources, then figure out a way to get more credibility when I got out, then building businesses that would allow me to achieve financial independence so that I could do what I wanted to do and give everything away for free to help more people in prison emerge successfully. And that is a great purpose in my life. It's not the right thing for everybody, but it certainly worked for me. And I certainly want to thank all of you who've brought those questions and for paying attention. And with this video series that we recorded, thanks to the Christian Podcast Group and Beto and his wife, I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank the staff and the Bureau of Prisons who have allowed me this opportunity to speak with people. But we're not only providing the video, we're also providing a workbook that goes along with this video, and we hope that you will do your part. Have your family visit prisonprofessors.org, where everything is free. One thing I always say is nobody needs to hire a scammy prison consultant, and there are a lot of them out there that will try and scam your way out of money. I know that some people want to talk to a person. The only person I would ever recommend is Justin Paperny and his team at White Collar Advice, because I worked with them and I created materials that they can use. But all of those materials really require you to do your part. And I would say, first of all, invest in yourself. Nobody has to pay to be the best in the world at what they want to do, but everybody needs a plan. And I hope you start executing your plan. Thanks so much for being a part of our community.